You are listening to the Apex Hour hosted by Ryan Paul on KSUU Thunder 91.1. This show allows more personal time with our guests, allowing them to give us their stories and opinions. We will also give you new music to listen to, hoping you enjoy some new sounds and genres. Welcome to this episode of the Apex Hour.
Welcome to the Apex Radio Hour. I'm producer Kason Graff, and I'm joined today with Apex Director Ryan Paul and our special guest, the one, the only, Dr. Crystal Koenig. I'll turn it over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Kason. We're here in the studio with also our producers, Lauren Bird and Kate Scherer. And I got to tell you, this is exciting to have my friend and colleague, Dr. Crystal Riley Koenig, our resident primatologist here at Southern Utah University. I will tell you, I've been doing this for a while, and in my living memory, there's only two people. You were the second person to ever do our show twice.
It's quite a distinction.
So, you know it.
I do.
You know it.
I'm very honored.
So, just for information, we had Dr. Koenig on our show as a podcast a few months ago. So, and then Dr. Koenig is the recipient of the 2025 Grace A. Tanner Faculty Distinguished Lecture. And so it's been a policy or tradition of Eccles Apex that we need the Faculty Distinguished Lecturer comes on and talks with us again. So the reason I say that is because if you have not listened to Dr. Koenig's first episode recorded a while ago, go back in your podcast feed and listen to Dr. Koenig's podcast, because we're going to talk about different things, and we get a lot of really cool stories in episode 1, I guess we'll say. So we'll start with now, and just very briefly, will you please just give us a quick, who you are and what you do and what your current research is?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm Crystal Koenig, as Professor Ryan Paul said, and I am an assistant professor of anthropology here at Southern Utah University, and I am a primatologist by training, so I study the world's wild non-human primates, and my research has historically been about primates in Singapore, in the wild in Singapore, how they overlap with humans, how many of them there are, and then my more recent research has been about the portrayal of primates in entertainment media, so primate actors and television shows, and primates in documentaries, and that's actually the topic of the distinguished lecture that I gave today.
Yes, and you'll be able to see that on the SU Apex webpage here in a week or so. Once it gets edited and that kind of thing, we have to bleep out all of Crystal's profanities during the live show.
It's just how I am.
Yeah.
It's amazing they let me on the radio.
I know. Well, we've got a beep button. So, your original research when you came out of grad school was in Singapore, looking at macaques. Is that correct?
That was going into graduate school. I spent some time before going back to graduate school to earn my PhD. I spent 3 years in Singapore working with macaques, yes.
So what is the relationship really between anthropology and primatology? Like, you teach anthropology on campus, but your research isn't, you would call yourself a primatologist, is that
So
correct?
Primatology is more specific. It really falls under a subsection of anthropology. So I am an anthropologist. I'm a biological anthropologist. That's what my degree is in. That's what my PhD is in. But part of biological anthropology is better understanding primates, or non-human primates specifically, as our closest living relatives. And so primatology is a specific term that's often applied to people who study primates, and it can be applied to biological anthropologists. It can also be applied to biologists and psychologists who have some interest in primates. So I am both a primatologist and a biological anthropologist.
So primates meaning specifically monkeys and apes.
Monkeys and apes are the most interesting to me, but in this research that I'm doing on primates and entertainment media, that also includes things that aren't monkeys and apes but are still primates. So that includes lemurs, lorises, tarsiers, and galagos. So those are all primates that are neither monkeys nor apes. It's more diverse.
I think
than
you're making
people
some
think.
of those words up. I don't
Sounds
know.
made up.
A
Galago sounds
galago. But humans are primates too.
Absolutely.
And
We are primates.
What is the definition of a primate?
Yeah, primate is really tricky because you can't choose one thing. So my students in my biological anthropology class know this. We typically define a primate on the basis of 7 characteristics. And so it's not just one thing. It would be easier if we could say, well, primates are just mammals that have blue eyes. But unfortunately, we can't do that. So we define them on the basis of 7 characteristics. Some of those things are things like large brain relative to body size, fingernails instead of claws, being highly social. Those are all characteristics of primates.
The encephalactic quotient.
Encephalization quotient. You get a B in primatology today.
You know what I meant. That's what matters. So in this, you think about like sciences, right? There are physics, there are theoretical physicists, and then the ones that actually do the work to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that a lot of primatology really is spent doing field work, right? There's no theoretical primatologist.
Not really. I mean, there are some primatologists who, look back into the literature, look at patterns of extinction in primates, but the vast majority of primates are spending substantial time in the field. Yeah.
So you've spent substantial time in the field.
Yes, 3 years.
And I would bet that you have some interesting stories of field work.
Oh, any primatologist worth their salt has some interesting field work stories. Do you want to hear some?
I would love to hear some.
Okay. Let's see. A couple of my favorites, personally. There was a time when we were censusing the entire macaque population of Singapore, counting all of the macaques in Singapore. And it was me and another field assistant, primarily, that were doing this work. And we did the main island, and Singapore is not that big. The total land area of Singapore is only a little bit bigger than Zion National Park. And so we had done the main land area, and we had to go to the outlying islands. And we had done a couple of those, and then we were talking to some local officials. Okay, where have we not gone yet where there might be monkeys? And they said, well, you need to go to this one island. But they said it in this very, ominous way. And they said, you need to go to Coney Island. I regret to inform you that you need to go to Coney Island. And we said, okay, what's wrong with Coney Island? And they just said, you'll see, which was pretty scary. So we pushed them a little more. And then they said, it belongs to a mean cow. And that was all they would tell us. So we scheduled a day to go out to this island and to see if there were monkeys there. And the island was gated off, and so we managed to get access to the island, and we spent the entire day in some sort of horror movie situation where we were being pursued by the most aggressively mean cow I've ever seen in my life. And I grew up in Ohio, very close to cows who usually don't care much about you. And this cow cared a lot and really wanted us off of her island. And they seem to have, in Singapore, just left this island to this cow. They said they don't know what to do about her. She's very mean. She charges people. But island, real estate in Singapore is tremendously expensive and in very high demand. And they've just abandoned this island to this aggressive cow. And she really hated us. And she spent most of the day making our lives miserable. And we didn't even find any monkeys. So it was all for naught.
Could you see the cow from everywhere on the island?
No, that was the really terrifying part about it. Sometimes you would lose sight of her and it would be like, is she behind me? I know she's behind me and she's mad,
Which means that you do less research because someone's always got to be on cow duty.
Yeah, you're on cow duty.
Right? So no one lived on the island.
No one lived. She lived on the island.
Just the mean cow.
She ruled the island with an iron hoof. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And as I asked after her, years after I left, because I was so curious about, I still don't know. I mean, how did she come to be there? What is the situation? Why? What's going on? There aren't very many cows in Singapore. How did she come to rule the island? It's all very mysterious. I don't know. Last I heard, she still owns the island.
So the ruminant versus the primate.
Yeah, and we lost. I mean, one and the only time, as far as I know, we really lost to the cow. She can have it. It's hers.
Well, that sounds like you should write a book or write a... So in the working with wild animals, and we'll talk a little bit more about later about the idea of captive primates and those kinds of things. I would imagine that there have been some pretty, harrowing attacks or bites or anything what has anything happened?
Yeah, so there were some times when I was a little fearful of the macaques. So for the most part, macaques are small. They're not super scary. They don't tend to be too aggressive unless you do something obnoxious to them, like poke them or kick them, then they can get pretty aggressive. But there was a time when the macaques get stressed, which is, standard. If you stress a wild animal, sometimes they'll retaliate. When they get stressed, they get more aggressive. And so there was a time when we had a visiting primatologist who was very experienced. And, I was just a young, inexperienced primatologist. And we were supposed to be showing him around on just a group that we'd been studying pretty extensively. And so I had 2 senior primatologists kind of accompanying me in the field that day, and we were just kind of tracking the monkeys, and it was pretty low stress. I was telling them what we'd learned about them so far. And then it was just like chaos broke loose because a stray dog came out of nowhere and attacked and killed one of the macaques. And when there's something lethal that occurs in a macaque group, and this was a large group of about 69 macaques, they get very protective, and they were very confused because it all happened so fast. And so they got really protective of the rest of the group members. And so we were kind of hemmed in up against this fence, and then we had 68 angry monkeys in front of us, and we couldn't get out. We couldn't get past them. And then 3 more dogs came. And so we had dogs attacking monkeys and monkeys kind of blaming us for the presence of the dogs, and we couldn't get out. And so it was very stressful. I did think that we would get bitten, but we didn't. The rest of the monkeys survived. It was pretty chaotic day, but it all turned out okay. And I never actually saw any serious injury incurred by a person, and all of the people who got things like scratches were engaging in really not very smart behavior, like trying to pet monkeys. So in Singapore, I never witnessed anything where somebody actually got hurt.
So you talk about these groups of macaques. Are they family groups? Are they like friend groups? I mean, what does that?
Sure. So macaques, long-tailed macaques, follow what we call a female phylopatric system. So all of the females who are born into a group remain in the group, and they inherit their mother's rank to some degree. And the males, they just get kicked out when they reach sexual maturity. So when they get to be, kind of like teenage years, they are encouraged to leave the group. And if they keep hanging around, they are strongly encouraged and then eventually threatened until they leave. And this is really common in primates and in other animals where you have something like a sex-biased dispersal pattern, so that you see an avoidance of inbreeding. So these males leave so they're not hanging around and mating with their sisters and cousins and aunts and things like that.
So the group is led by, it's a matriarchal system, or?
So rank is inherited along the female lines. It's inherited by the females, but the males are still superior to the females, and they fight for rank. So the males that are in the group, they have like a struggle for dominance, and the male hierarchy supersedes the female hierarchy. In macaques, that's not true in all primates.
So like when you see the mountain gorillas with like the silverback, he's the leader, if you will.
They have a slightly different social structure. He is the leader, and he tends to be the only male in the group, and then that he has some females that live with him with their offspring. So they have their own social structure. And this is one of the really fascinating things about primates, right? There are so many different primates. There are hundreds of species, and many of them have their own unique little social organization patterns, right? Like, so bonobos are a fascinating example because they're apes. They're very similar to chimpanzees, but the females are in charge. The female hierarchy supersedes the male hierarchy, and they're much more socially stable than other primates where the males are in charge. So they have a much more kind of harmonious existence. They're sometimes called the peacemaking primates, and the females are in charge there.
So in chimpanzees, what is the social structure?
The males are in charge. The male hierarchy supersedes the female hierarchy, and they have sex-biased dispersal patterns as well. So we see both males and females to some degree leaving in chimpanzees. So we see stronger bonds among the males than in other species because the males are often likely to stick around.
And the males will mate with multiple female partners.
Yeah, which is true in many primates, but not all primates. Some primates have what we call we used to call it monogamy, but it turns out that that's not really accurate, because even in the most monogamous primates, they're not really monogamous. So now we call it being pair bonded. So some primates don't have this thing where they're kind of mating freely with all these different females or all these different males. They'll have a strong central pair bond, and they might, violate that pair bond by mating with the neighbor, but their primary bond is with just one other individual.
Because you don't see that in Disney's Tarzan, right? Kerchak doesn't cheat on his.
It doesn't fit the narrative,
It doesn't fit the narrative. You mean Disney's not telling me the truth?
Yeah, I have some pretty heartbreaking news about how Disney is not telling you the truth in a variety of ways, including the Disney nature documentary Chimpanzee. But I don't know if you want me to ruin your day.
Well, I mean, how could it get? I don't know about that, but yeah. Let's talk about that in a second.
Sure.
So when you talk about, the observation of these apes and monkeys, it's relatively recent that. I don't want to put this like credible scientists or whatever, or people are actually dedicating their time to go out and do this. And obviously the person that comes to mind more than anybody else is, maybe Jane Goodall or Diane Fossey with gorillas and chimpanzees. And you had a chance to work with Jane Goodall.
I did. It was probably one of the biggest highlights of my career. So when I was working in Singapore, Jane Goodall came to visit, and she does a lot of work with Jane Goodall Institute, and she has institutes around the entire globe at this point. And we had Jane Goodall Institute Singapore, and she came and she wanted to talk with local leaders about solutions for better macaque management in Singapore. And so I was included in those discussions, and so I got to spend some time working with Jane Goodall on better solutions for the macaques. And at one point she said, "That's a really great idea, Crystal." And I'll tell you, I thought about just tattooing it on my forehead. But yeah, it was great to meet her, and it was great to see, she did so much for the field, but she's still such an advocate, and she still spends so much time advocating for the conservation of all primates, not just chimpanzees. She's really broadened her scope and her advocacy in that way.
And one of the most important things to know about Jane Goodall is that she is I'm throwing the line here to you.
I don't know what line.
What does she
I'm not
eat?
catching it.
She's
vegan.
Yes, she's vegan. Because you learned that the hard way.
I did. It was actually really sad. So we had this event for her where she was invited as a speaker. I wasn't involved in organizing the event, but I was attending the event. And there was a lunch afterward, and there was nothing for her to eat because they didn't organize a vegan option, which if you're having Jane Goodall come to your campus, you should just make the whole event be vegan. This is a big part of her advocacy. So this was really sad. Yeah, it's an important fact to know about her, and it's something that she's a big advocate for.
And you can add on to maybe it's even on your CV or your resume that you got Jane Goodall.
I got her some lunch.
Food. You went to... Yeah, that's a good idea, Crystal. That's a good idea.
Crystal.
All right, so let's take our first break. And for those of you who've listened to the show before know that we always ask our guests to select some songs that are relevant or mean something in some way. And again, episode 1 of Dr. Crystal Koenig has some really banging music to it, and episode 2 will as well. We're still figuring this out. Sometimes if you're listening to the podcast, we won't have the songs there for various reasons, so we'll have a list, and you can follow us on Spotify. My colleague Lauren Bird has also really created a master Spotify list. So every guest we've had since 2021, she has gone through and taken all of their songs and made a master list. So if you follow Eccles Apex or Apex on Spotify, you can access that master list. So the first song that we have selected from the copious list that you gave us is one that makes me smile every time I hear it. It is Dr. Zaius from The Simpsons. We have a colleague, Dr. Koenig and I, Dr. Ostrowski, who's a sociologist who loves The Simpsons, and this reminds me of him in some ways. So this is the one episode of The Simpsons. They do Planet of the Apes, the musical, with the song Dr. Zaius. This is a remix by Mermolo. So tell us why you chose this particular ditty.
Oh, I mean, Planet of the Apes, first of all, is iconic. But if you could possibly make Planet of the Apes better, it would probably be by having The Simpsons do a parody of it. So I chose it in part because of that, but also because, and I'm very sorry to inform you of this song gets stuck in your head. It's just kind of relentless. So it really is an earworm. So as soon as I was asked to think about these songs, this is one that I thought of last time. But because I talked about primates and entertainment media today, it just seemed to be a perfect thematic fit. So.
Okay, this is Dr. Zaius, The Simpsons Remix by Murmullo. Bring.
All right. That was... Oh, I need to pause that. Whoops. Spoiler alert for the next song break. That was Dr. Zaius, The Simpsons Remix by Murmullo from the Simpsons episode Selma the Fish, I believe is what it's called. And the play is called Stop the Planet of the Apes, I Want to Get Off. And we're here in the radio booth with Dr. Crystal Riley Koenig and Ryan Paul. I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Kaysen. We also have some bad news that we were just found out by Kaysen that the cow of the Mean Cow Island has since passed away.
Is it bad news? Who is it bad news for?
I don't know. But
just Hamburger? That's what we called her.
I didn't call her Hamburger.
I did. I'm a vegetarian, and this is how much I hate this cow.
Yeah. Well, I want you to know that I always make sure when we eat together that I provide that we get vegetarian food.
I know you do. So. I greatly appreciate it.
So we talked. We left off talking about Jane Goodall and her conservation efforts with chimpanzees and now a number of other primate species. And you referenced the Disney nature film Chimpanzee, which is fairly recent.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's within the last decade, maybe.
Yeah.
So, and of course, Disney nature has a long history in the 40s or the 50s, I guess. I think The Living Desert was the first one, trying to communicate some kind of nature education or nature ideas for profit and for nature. And we've learned now since that many of those scenes were manufactured for viewing delight, I guess. So talk to me first about Disney's Chimpanzee and what you. I mean, I realize that you're walking a fine line here because no one wants to badmouth the mouse because we don't want any legal action. So, but tell me what you're thinking about this.
Yeah. So Disney Nature's Chimpanzee. First of all, it's an excellent film. I'm not dissing it. But it follows this beautiful story about how a male chimpanzee adopts this orphaned young chimpanzee, which is really rare. Male chimpanzees are not overly invested in young chimpanzees. They typically leave those responsibilities to the females. But this young little Oscar, as they call him in the film, he loses his mother. His mother dies. And so this male chimpanzee takes him on and takes care of him and treats him exactly like a mother would. And that is very heartwarming. I mean, it is perfect. It's perfectly in line with a Disney storyline. It's got all the pieces. A dead mom. There's always a dead mom in a Disney movie. And it's got an orphan, and it's got this very heartwarming tale. But at the end of the movie, because this is a Disney movie, everything is great, and everybody lives happily ever after. But, and this is the part where I'm going to ruin your day, in reality, this was a real story. Oscar really did get adopted by this male chimpanzee, and that is heartwarming, and I'm not downplaying that. But at the end of the filming, Oscar disappeared, and he almost certainly died because young chimpanzees can't live on their own. And so that's the actual end of the story. But what they did instead was filmed footage of other young chimpanzees and kind of spliced it together so they could create this and they all lived happily ever after kind of narrative.
That wasn't going where I thought it was going to go.
I'm sorry.
I thought you were going to say that
turn.
the male got all mad at the Oscar.
No. Well, we don't really know actually what happened to Oscar, so maybe, but
so I mean it raises
not.
A very interesting point about that film and those types of films, specifically about the role that these types of films play in primate conservation, right? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of what we talked about today in the lecture, right? There's a lot of impact that entertainment media can have, and I think sometimes that is lost on people. Sometimes people think like, I'm just watching TV for fun. Like, I don't need to think about these deeper issues. But even if you're not trying to think about it, or even if you're not necessarily trying to be impacted by it, the way that primates are portrayed in media can have real impact on people's conservation beliefs and even their attitudes. And we know this from previous research. So any footage of primates who are, wearing clothes, for example, or shown in a really like human environment, so in an office building or in a house, when people see this on television, they have this reaction where they think like, this primate can't possibly be endangered, because if it were endangered, they wouldn't be putting it in clothes and parading it around on television. And so we know that we see these real world impacts to how primates are portrayed in media. And that matters a lot because primates are increasingly in a lot of trouble. Most primates are now endangered or headed in that direction. So it has real impacts. And stories like chimpanzee, they can be a force in the opposite direction, right? They can tell these heartwarming stories and get people invested in primates that live in the wild in a more appropriate way. But it's important to follow that up with some further actions, some things you can do, because a lot of these wild films, they focus on a really kind of idealistic view of nature that doesn't necessarily exist. Oscar doesn't live happily ever after.
So what does that call to action look like, right? I mean, what does someone who doesn't live in a country with no native primates? Does America have native primates?
We don't. We do not have any native primates. We have had primates historically. There have been fossil primates that used to live in the United States, but we do not have any native primates now that are supposed to be here. There are some primates that are not supposed to be here living, and I would only give you one guess. Of course they're living in Florida, because of course they are. Somebody released primates down in Florida, and I did do some field work with those primates as well. But they're not a native population. They're just running around down in Florida. But we don't have native primates. And so, the question becomes, like, what role do we play if we don't have native primates? And the answer is that we play a pretty significant role here in the United States in particular, because of several things. One is that we visit primate countries pretty frequently as tourists, and we often behave very inappropriately in primate countries, doing things like trying to touch primates or taking advantage of like tourism opportunities where you might have a primate on your shoulder. And those are really harmful practices that drive the demand for primate poaching. Another thing that we do is we consume products that have come from primate habitat countries. So things like palm oil, which is severely threatening orangutans. We are huge consumers and huge importers of palm oil, and that is directly impacting orangutan habitat. And another thing we do is that in America, we drive a lot of the demand for primate pets. And primate pets, in some cases, for certain species, are a significant part of what is driving those particular species to extinction or to the brink of extinction. So slow lorises are an excellent example of a primate pet that is being driven to the brink of extinction by the demand for primate pets.
Can you give me an example of like what is a slow loris? Like, do I see it in the movies? Do I see it, or what is it?
Yeah, so slow lorises are I know this is going to be surprising because I love macaques a lot, but I love slow lorises even more because
Did you just say you have a favorite child?
I did. I'm really sorry. I apologize to the macaques of the world, but slow lorises, if you could see them, you would understand. They're nocturnal, so they have gigantic eyes, and as their name implies, they move very, very slowly through the trees, and they're so endearing, and I love them so much. But it is this exact cuteness that is driving them to the brink of extinction, and it is the fact that they're slow, which helps them evade detection from predators by not, moving the branches too much in the trees. They're able to move slowly and be sneaky. But it's the slowness that also makes them pretty easy to catch. And you can see this actually in an episode of Wild Things with Dominic Monaghan. You might know Dominic Monaghan from Lord of the Rings. He had his own nature documentary series.
He's one of the hobbits, right?
He's a hobbit. He probably should have stuck to being a hobbit because he does some inappropriate things in this series, including plucking a slow loris out of a tree and turning it around to look at it, which is very traumatic for a slow loris. So they're one example of something that's being pushed near extinction. And you might see them, I mean, you can see them in Wild Things with Dominic Monaghan. They're in some other nature documentaries, but they're most often featured in social media because they end up in the pet trade and people make money from making social media videos of them being adorable, but engaging in consuming the social media then drives the demand for more pets.
So what is the connection then between humans and non-human primates, right? I mean, why you think about like dogs and cats and, you know, I can see that, but what is the connection then to that? And I don't know a dog owner who says like, oh, I have this dog knows me and I know it. Like you see primate like chimp crate, like, I can know these monkeys will never harm me. These apes will never harm me. What is the drive? What causes that drive for that connection?
Yeah, I think that part of the weakness of non-human primates is that they are so similar to us, right? They're our closest living relatives. And so when we look at them and we see them behave in certain ways, we really see ourselves in them. When we see them taking care of their offspring, we can see how much they care for their babies. And when we see them getting frustrated, we can recognize that frustration because it looks so much like our own. And so I think a lot of what we see in them, sometimes it makes us think that we know them better than we do. And I think that is so apparent in Chimp Crazy. You know, Tanya Haddix, the exotic animal broker, she talks a lot about like, this chimp, he misses me, he sees me, he understands me. And she assumes all of this deep understanding of this chimpanzee who's not communicating these things to her because she thinks that that close relationship gives her special insight into him. When in reality, you know, primates are not domesticated like cats and dogs. Cats and dogs can often live happily alongside us because they've evolved over a long time. They've been selected for that. Primates have not had that shared evolutionary history with humans where they've evolved alongside us to live in our homes. They're wild animals that we're taking from the wild and bringing into our homes, often to catastrophic effect.
Yeah, you know, I've just thought about this as you were talking and even earlier today about this idea. Even the old media has this connection of, you know, humans primate connection. Like you think about like King Kong, all of the King Kong movies have some actor or some character that somehow Kong bonds with. Mm-hmm. Like, I know you, I care about you. And you know, you don't see that in Godzilla, right? We don't have humans connecting with Godzilla.
Yeah.
But this like King Kong, even, I mean, we've got this in the radio station. There's a cutout of Chewbacca behind us, right? And I realize Chewbacca's not a primate and he's a Wookiee, and I realize it's a whole different thing.
Is it? I don't know.
But this whole connection of, you know, you see these like anthropomorphic ideas of, well, they're just like us.
Right.
If we treat them the right way, they'll be just like us. But that's not correct.
I think it's tricky. There's a really fine line, right? So when Jane Goodall first started doing her research, she caught a lot of flack for anthropomorphizing chimpanzees and for describing them and describing their personalities in much the same way you would describe a human personality. You know, this one's gentle and this one's kind and this one's kind of grumpy and this one's kind of mean. And for describing them that way, she was really criticized for being unscientific. And she was also criticized for naming the chimpanzees. You know, you had David Graybeard and Fanny and Flossie. And she was criticized for that not being scientific either. But I think once you spend some time with primates, if you try to describe them in really kind of cold and clinical terms, it becomes really difficult to talk about what they're doing, because what they're doing is, for example, a mother caring for her infant or a mother consoling her infant who's upset. And it's really difficult to talk about them in a, you know, kind of subject A touches subject B kind of way, because we recognize ourselves in them and we see and understand what they're doing. I think that goes too far, though, when people think that they can really see into the inner lives of these primates and understand what they're thinking. And I think so often pet owners are really way off base about that. So
in some ways, you could make an argument that things like what Jane Goodall did to help us connect with these animals in some way caused us to connect in a way that was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
I'm not criticizing Jane Goodall.
Oh,
I'm
no,
just,
never.
You know, yeah, no.
That's blasphemous
Yes.
in primatology. No, I mean, I think that's fair to say that sometimes people take this a little too far. I think it's important that we recognize primates in their own right and not kind of put too much of ourselves on them. And I think when we get a little overly familiar, that's often when we get into problematic territory.
Okay, so I'm going to say one more thing before our next break, and I'm really nervous to ask this.
I'm scared.
But what about David Attenborough?
Oh, the crowned king of nature
I mean,
documentaries?
yes. Are we
supposed to have negative
do we?
feelings
I'm
about?
just wondering.
No. All love for Attenborough over here, for sure. So David Attenborough, I have a lot of respect for him. I mean, not just because I want him to narrate my life, but because he is incredibly talented. But he also said a number of years ago that he was really tired of doing nature documentaries that were dishonest. So he said, he goes into the forest and he'll encounter animals periodically, but then he'll watch them be spliced together into this documentary that gives the illusion of this forest that's just absolutely teeming with life, and then it really gives people a false impression. So he's been concerned about these same kinds of issues that I'm talking about with primates for long before I've been concerned about this. And eventually he said, it seems really dishonest that we're talking about nature and we're not talking about conservation, even as climate change is kicking into high gear. And so a number of years ago, he said, I'm not going to do any more films that don't talk about conservation at some point. And so now if you see any more recent Attenborough films, there is some sort of conservation message embedded in that film because it's part of his, conditions for agreeing to work. And because he is the king of nature documentaries, he can make his own conditions and people will abide.
And he's evolved, right? I mean, he starts out that Zoo Quest show where he's going in and watching zoos, the London Zoo, capture animals to take back to the zoo. So he's kind of, he recognizes the sins of his youth in some ways.
Yeah.
So, okay. So let's stop there for our second break. This is a song which I actually quite love and in some way makes complete sense because it's you all over. This song is called Rebel Girl by Bikini Kill. Can you talk about that song for me?
Yeah, so the Trimates, so Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, and Baruta Galdikas are often referred to as the Trimates. And I think about them as being like the kind of hallmark rebel girls, right? They were doing this research at a time when these were not the kinds of jobs that were appropriate for women to have. And so they were really bucking a lot of society's expectations about what they should be doing. And so I think this is kind of a great anthem for them.
Okay, this is Rebel Girl by Bikini Kill. Bring.
All right. That was Rebel Girl by Bikini Kill. You're listening to the Apex Radio Hour here on KSU Thunder 91.1. I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Kason. So, first of all, I should say that as we were walking into the studio, my colleague and student producer Kate Scherer mentioned that her father got bitten by a macaque. So,
Shout out to Kate's dad.
He did, yeah. He lived in Singapore, and I asked him if the monkeys were an issue, and he said that one time he got bit, and I said, well, what'd you do? And he said I was messing with it. So.
Yeah. Props to him for an honest answer, because I would have seriously questioned anything
I
else.
knew that he had done something, yeah.
Ask him next time if you've been to Mean Cow Island.
Yeah,
So, the other thing I find fascinating about, that sounds like a research subject about you, but we've talked about this before, but not as in much detail with your primatology work, is you were also a forensic anthropologist.
So when I started working at SU, I knew that I really was hopeful that they would hire an anthropologist. When I first started working here, I worked in interdisciplinary studies. And when I started, there were only 2 anthropologists who were working at SUU, and neither of them was a biological anthropologist. And so I was just very, very hopeful that this tiny institution would decide they needed a 3rd anthropologist and that they would think that a biological anthropologist would be the appropriate next choice. And so I went and talked to Dr. Dean and Dr. Olson, who were the anthropologists at the time, and asked them what their teaching needs were likely to be in the future. And they said they were really likely to need someone to teach forensic anthropology, which also falls under the umbrella of biological anthropology with primatology. So I had some relevant training in forensic anthropology, but I hadn't done much, and I wasn't really feeling ready to teach it, but I knew that I wanted to be prepared if they hired someone. So I really kind of beefed up my credentials before they advertised this job. And then once I did get hired and I started teaching forensic anthropology, I was surprised, I think, at how much I loved it. So for those of you who don't know, forensic anthropology is really the application of a lot of the tools we use in biological anthropology to a criminal legal context. So taking something like unidentified human remains that have been found, out maybe in a national park, and then trying to narrow down who this individual might have been in life. And so I really wanted to get some additional training so I could kind of do those classes justice. And so I applied for funding and was able to go to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, to get training at something called an anthropological research facility, or as it is more colloquially known, a body farm. So these are research facilities where scientists study under carefully controlled conditions human decomposition. So they have donors that are placed and they study the natural process of human decomposition.
So you donate your body to science.
Correct.
And somebody comes and gets you and throws you in the bog.
Listen, they don't throw anybody anywhere. I think one of the things that I was most struck by is how respectful the process is. So they refer to their donors only as donors all of the time, and they take really great care of them. They treat them with a lot of respect, but they do just document all of the natural processes that occur after someone has died. They do take only, at the place where I was and at most other facilities, they take only people who have directed their donation to this kind of research facility. So you wouldn't, for example, donate your body hoping that you were going to go to teaching, undergraduates anatomy and then, find that you've been decayed in a field. Instead, these are people who know what this facility is and what happens there, and in their life they agree to this and they fill out all this paperwork. They often even visit the facility, although they only visit the front office, not the actual facility, but during their life, so that they know exactly what they're getting into.
So I would imagine that there is a significant amount of security and all kinds of things around this facility.
Yes and no. I think I was so surprised. I've been reading about these facilities for a long time. I was kind of shocked when I showed up in Knoxville, and they give you kind of specific directions on how to get there, but it's just in town. It's next to a hospital where people are going to get surgery and things. And you park in this parking lot, and you can either walk over to the canteen from the hospital, or you can walk over to this fenced off location, and that's the body farm. And so other than wondering why the parking lot smells bad, there's no indication that this facility is there.
So what kind of things did you do there?
Yeah, it was interesting. So we watched a fresh donor be placed, and then over the next several days that I was at the training, we kind of watched how that went, how that process progressed. We practiced like mapping techniques for if you were at, for example, a scene that you needed to document because human remains have been recovered there, how you would map the location of all of the bones and any other relevant evidence, things like bullet casings or clothing or soda cans that might be associated with this person. So we practiced those techniques, and then we also excavated a grave. So after donors have kind of decomposed about as far as they're going to get on the surface, they often have some mummified tissue, and ideally they'll bury the donors for about a year to break down some of that tissue so they can then clean the bones and add them to the skeletal collection. And so when the graves are excavated, that's done very carefully and systematically, and so we did that as well. We excavated a grave.
So, and the things that you've learned there and taught our students here at SUU, you've actually put into practice recently. the skills that you did with Pipe Springs National Monument?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Boy, I was like, what did I do? Sounds nefarious. Yes. So we had a member of the public approach us about a human cranium that had come to be in their possession through something, slightly convoluted means. And I got as much information as I could about this human cranium, and then I worked to try to repatriate it. So given the analyses that I did in collaboration with a forensic anthropologist at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, it seemed to be converging on the likelihood of this cranium being very old and being native and not of any, legal significance. So we worked with the Kaibab band of the Paiute at Pipe Spring National Monument to repatriate this cranium so that they could have it back in their possession.
So I would imagine with, forensic anthropology and primatology in these classes, you probably come up with some fairly challenging topics or discussions. How do you engage with students in those ways?
Yeah, I think this is something that can be tricky. I really, I really love when students take forensic anthropology when they're kind of on the fence. Like they think they might be interested in this topic, but they're not really too sure. And I love watching the progression because either way, it's interesting to me. Sometimes students are like, I love this, and they really just double down. And sometimes students just discover that they do not like this, and all the better, because it's better to know an undergrad than out after you've gotten a job
at the body farm
and you suddenly realize you hate it and it stinks. So I do a number of things, and one of the things I do is I take the students to the cadaver lab on SU's campus in collaboration with some of the professors there so that they can see some of the things that we're talking about in real life. And I find that is a really engaging thing for students to do. I also have them do a real world project where they try to look at a publicly available database and then try to match missing people with unidentified human remains that exist in that database. And they really love that project. It's usually their favorite part of the semester.
It's just a fascinating thing to think about. So let's take our third break before we get back into our What's Bringing Us Joy segment. This is a song that I think is really interesting. It's called One Step Closer, and it's by Leona Lewis. And this is from a really, I've actually been watching this with Evelyn, my young daughter, from the Apple TV original series called Jane, where a girl kind of, I don't know how to describe it, sees animals. And how would you describe the...
Yeah, I think that's...
sees animals, yeah. And it's about conservation. Really a beautiful, beautiful show. So this is, tell me why you chose this song.
I mean, we've mentioned Jane Goodall a number of times, and she's really like the most iconic primatologist. And there has been so much media created about her, and it's hard to have a fresh take on Jane Goodall. And I think this series does a good job of that, and of kind of translating it to yet another generation. I mean, Jane Goodall's been around a long time now, and I'm happy to see that there are still efforts being made to bring her work to young audiences that are coming up now, like your daughter.
Cool. This is One Step Closer by Leona Lewis from the Apple original series Jane. Bring.
All right, that was One Step Closer, sung by Leona Lewis. You're listening to the Apex Radio Hour here on KSUU Thunder 91.1. I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Kason. We've had a great conversation. Part 2 of Dr. Crystal Riley Koenig here on the Apex Radio Hour. I strongly, strongly encourage you to download the podcast for episode 1 and bookend these. It'd be a great listen on the drive home. So just please do that. Dr. Koenig, Crystal, my friend, we're happy to have you here. And as you know, we always end our radio hour with a segment about what's bringing us joy. So, Dr. Crystal Riley Koenig, what are you currently watching, reading, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
Okay, so right now I'm reading a book under great duress because Libby is about to take it away from me. This is the library app. And it's called Somewhere Beyond the Sea, and it's a sequel to an earlier book by T.J. Klune. And it's like fantasy about children who have magical powers and are all in a a magical foster home together under the care of someone else who's magical. And it's really good. And it's on an island in the sea, which is exactly the vibe that I need right now.
Is that is the first one the house on the Cerulean Sea?
Cerulean Sea,
Cerulean
yeah.
Sea?
Yeah, that one is a good one.
Okay,
I
what's the
recommend
name of the
that too.
book?
Somewhere Beyond the Sea.
By T.J. Klune.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Kate Scherer, what are you currently watching, reading, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
The SNL 50th anniversary show is on Sunday, so I've been really have found a lot of joy in watching all the promos and interviews that they're doing with all the old timers, the cast members that I grew up with. It's been a lot of fun. It's a good year to be a fan of SNL.
To be fair, you talk about growing up. You were not around for the 50 years.
No.
You're like year 42, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not that 42. But. All right, Lauren Bird, what are you currently watching, reading, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
So yesterday I got to watch the trailer for season 3 of The Wheel of Time, and it looks like it's going to include plot lines from like the 4th book that I really love, and that my favorite character is finally going to get more character development, and I'm really excited for that.
That's awesome.
And it's coming out next month, so that'll be really fun.
So you're too young to have committed the massive amount of hours to read the entire Wheel of Time series, right?
No, I've read it.
Oh my gosh.
It took like a little over a year, but I've read the whole thing. It's really good.
It's like 40,000 pages.
That's a lot.
Uh-huh.
It took you a little over a year?
Yeah, I
That's
listened
really
to most
fast.
of the books.
Okay.
Yeah, she doesn't use the Libby app.
No, I do use Libby all the time.
Forgive me for all you Libby users.
Yeah. It's
All
needed.
right, Case and Graph, what are you currently watching, reading, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
Okay, before I get into that, I do want to say that I'm currently listening to Wheel of Time, and I've been listening for like 7 months, and I'm on book 5. So I'm not sure how you did it all in just over a year. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm not listening enough. Anyway, what is currently bringing me joy is actually not a Brandon Sanderson thing this week, so sorry, Brandon. I've been recently rewatching Disney shows from my childhood. I started with Gravity Falls, which I somehow never watched as a kid. I was the target audience for it, didn't watch it until last year in December. And right now I'm on Star vs. the Forces of Evil. It's a really fun kids show from when I was a kid, back in the 20-teens, I guess. And yeah, it's been reliving the childhood nostalgia has been bringing me joy. How about you, Ryan? What are you watching, reading, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
I'm going to give you 2 because it's my prerogative. And Crystal, Dr. Koenig, and I have talked about this. As you may or may not know, the Koenigs, her husband, teaches psychology here on campus and are, fair to say, pretty avid board gamers.
Definitely fair to say, yeah.
And we have shared the board gaming table
Yes.
multiple times, and both have been gutted and devastated by her husband's, I would borderline say ethical play. But anyway, my sister and her husband also play board games there up north, and every year for Christmas they give me a board gaming weekend. So they get an Airbnb, and we go there with my son, and we just have food and play games. And that was this last weekend. They actually came down to Cedar, and we played a game that I'd had in my closet in the shelf for some time that I hadn't broken out, called The Loop. And I really, really loved it. We played it a couple times, and it's this kind of cooperative. You've got the evil mad scientist who's trying to destroy time, and you have to go through and complete missions. And it was just the perfect blend of cooperation and randomness and those kinds of things. So The Loop is, I think it's Pandasaurus Games is the one that did that. My second thing that's bringing me joy that just came because Crystal was talking about this is the other night Cammie fell asleep, and so I was watching TV, and it's the TV show Nature on PBS. They're airing a series, an episode called Attenborough's Wild Journey, and it really is this kind of reflection of David Attenborough. It's not a biography of him, but it's a reflection of his time doing these nature shows and what he's learned. He's in late 80s now, and this culmination of just what an amazing experience in life, that he has lived.
Yeah.
So Attenborough's Wild Journey on PBS on Nature. So with that, Dr. Koenig, my friend Crystal, thank you for being here. Maybe there'll be a hat trick,
Yeah.
right? A three-peat. I would love to have more conversations with you. Well, you and I have conversations all the time, but
Sure.
I'd love to let other people know how amazing, interesting you are.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here, and congratulations on being awarded and becoming this year's Grace A. Tanner Faculty Distinguished Lecturer. We are so excited. The last song we've got here you gave us is called It's Our World by Jackie from the Disney nature show, Disney nature film, Monkey Kingdom. Can you tell us why you chose this?
Oh, because Monkey Kingdom is fantastic, and it's narrated by Tina Fey. And so if you haven't watched Monkey Kingdom, I strongly recommend that you do. Arguably even better than Chimpanzee. So.
Now, just very quickly before we get to the song, there is, I know because I was thinking about this. What should I watch? What is the one primate, one or two that I should say this is really, really going to be?
Okay, I'm going to give you the answer that I always give people, which is BBC Life, the BBC Life series. There's an episode that's just called Primates. And it's so great that I make my students watch it in an intro in biological anthropology. They're actually watching it tomorrow. So surprise, students. So they watch this film, and it's great because it's such a well done overview of the primates overall. So that's my best answer.
That's so ironic that your students are watching live primates, and my students tomorrow are watching the election of 1828, Adams versus Jackson, which is
tell
like
them
two
they
primates.
can come to my classes.
I got to tell you, if you've never seen that story, these are two major primates fighting each other for some supremacy. All right, thank you, Dr. Koenig, for being here. Thanks everyone for listening. This is It's Our World by Jack A. from the Disney nature show Monkey Kingdom, and as always, in the words of the great American poet Bill Withers, I wish you well. Bring.